if you want. But there's also being an educated consumer when it comes to shopping around for colleges.
Yeah, so let's start with the saving. If you haven't heard of a college savings plan, a 529, don't worry. There might be some of you out there who have them and been funding them since birth. Other people are just learning about this thing. I should have done that. What can you tell us and maybe offer some hope for people who are feeling behind the eight ball?
Yeah, and hope is so important. Really, parents shouldn't get discouraged, no matter where they are in this process. But 529 plans are a specialized investment account designed for people saving for education. They offer tax benefits that help you to save more, essentially, and put more of that money toward your college expenses as well as other educational expenses.
So we get a tax break, just like when we contribute to our 401k, when we contribute to the 529.
Well, not exactly. There are two buckets to talk about.
Okay.
So on the federal tax side, you're putting in after-tax money.
Gotcha.
So you're not getting a break on your federal taxes. However, in the state of Connecticut, you do get a break. You can claim up to $10,000 if you're a married couple filing jointly on contributions that you make to the Connecticut Chet 529 plan.
Wow, okay. So does that mean if you're in a state, like let's just say most people listening to this will be from Connecticut, is it always better to go with your state 529 or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. It's definitely worth shopping around, but understand what your state offers, because certainly if there is a generous tax benefit like the one I mentioned for Connecticut, New Jersey and New York also have tax benefits that they offer for savers in their states. So that can definitely help you to basically put a little bit more money aside or have more money for other things. And that makes it worthwhile. However, you don't have to use your own state's plan. So it's always worth shopping around and seeing what else is out there. We offer a lot of tools, ratings, rankings, and things like that on our site that can help you to compare plans.
Yeah, savingforcollege.com. I went on there myself. You just press get started. It starts asking questions, can really help you prepare. But let's go back to the 529 for a second. Let's just assume I'm going to use the Connecticut plan. And for those folks out there who are opening one up, when you say tax benefit, it means it's reducing your taxable income. Is that right?
So there's a state tax benefit that I talked about, but when you go to withdraw money from your 529 plan, as long as you're using it for qualified education expenses, that money comes out tax-free on your federal and state income taxes, as long as you're, as I said, spending it on those qualified expenses.
Okay.
That includes things like tuition and fees, room and board, books, supplies, equipment. So it's very flexible, and that's just on the college side.
So, we try to lower our taxes with a 401k, but if you have 529, if you're thinking, gosh, we're coming toward the end of the year, should you try to put some extra money in?
Yeah, well, of course, it's always good to try to put extra money in. So sometimes people start the 529 plan maybe right when their child is born or shortly thereafter, and they might set an automated contribution, which is great. However, they may not go back to check that. So over time, hopefully you're getting some raises along the way, you're getting some bonuses, maybe you have some other windfalls coming your way. You might be able to afford over time to increase that contribution to your plan. So, and then when it comes to the end of the year, often most states will have an end of the year deadline for claiming your contribution. So you want to make sure that you've maxed out what you can contribute by the end of the year to be able to claim the maximum state tax deduction. By the way, Connecticut actually does offer rollover. So if you end up making more than that $10,000 contribution in 1 year, you may be able to roll that over and claim it in a later year.
Okay. So a lot of folks might have their biggest investments either in their house or in their 401k, and maybe they're behind the eight ball. They don't have very much in a 529, or maybe it's zero. And there are more and more parents, I'm reading in articles, that are using their 401ks to fund college or taking out a home equity loan to fund it. What do you think about that? Is that a dangerous thing that we're doing?
Yeah, it's a very individual decision. But you always want to think carefully about taking on debt. We are all comfortable, and I would say, I'm not a financial advisor, but I would say most financial advisors would say it's a perfectly good reason to take on debt for a major investment. College is a major investment, but that debt needs to be in proportion to what you can pay back realistically. And so usually with student loan debt, if the student is taking it out, that means making sure the total amount of debt is less than what you would expect them to make in their first year. That would be a good indicator that they'd be able to pay it off within 10 years, which is, again, a more reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
If it's something much more than you expect them to make in a year, probably getting into trouble. And similarly for the parents, if you're taking out home equity loans, things like that, you want to have a reasonable certainty that you can pay that off. But remember, you're taking on a lot of extra interest there as well.
Right. Okay. So back to what you just said, that was a good thing. I've never heard that before. If you're trying to determine what's an appropriate amount of debt, obviously we would want none, but that may not be realistic for a lot of folks. You should try to make your debt about what you think you're going to be able to make in your first year graduating college.
Yeah, really ideally less than what you think you're going to make.
Okay. So, obviously, if you're going to go take a job making an entry level of like $50,000, a lot of folks are taking out much more than that these days, aren't they?
That's right. So you want to be able to, if you're let's say you're going to make an entry level salary of about $50,000, if you take out $20,000 to $25,000 in loans, that would be considered reasonable for that level of salary. But everything is very, individual as well. So you have to think about what your other living expense, where are you going to be living? What are the other expenses that you may have? Are you in a high cost area like the tri-state area around Connecticut, right? And what are your other living costs going to be? There are a lot of calculators out there where you can estimate what monthly payments would be on a student loan.
Okay.
So another way to think about it is you want those payments to not be more than 10% of your gross salary.
Okay, 10% of your gross salary. Okay.
In that range. Mm-hmm.
So how does the loan process work? A lot of kids and parents are probably wondering, okay, I'll just sign up for this and we'll worry about it later. They got to go to college. Do they start paying them back right when they graduate? Is it affected by the parents' income? What do we need to know?
Well, so the federal loans, and most of what's out there as student loan debt are federal financial aid, and it's usually subsidized federal loans. There are limits actually on how much is given out to each student each year.
Okay.
So you actually can't get into $50,000 in debt just from federal financial aid loans because you wouldn't get that much over the course of 4 years. But yeah, the interest does start accruing on those loans and you have to start paying them back. So the reason it's dependent, or it can be dependent on the parents, is because that would be part of the federal financial aid package that a school might offer based on your FAFSA form.
So here in the Northeast, salaries tend to be higher. So it might look like, wow, they're making all this money, but in fact, as we all know, a home for what you might pay $150,000 for in the Midwest, you can't live like that here in the Northeast. So it might look like the parents are making a ton of money compared to other places in the U.S. Is that going to affect what they can get with help on the FAFSA and other tools?
Yeah, I mean, your income is definitely a big part of what is considered, and as far as I know, there is no regional balancing, let's say, for higher income areas or lower income areas.
Right, right. I remember that we went through 9/11 and they were talking about giving folks, help and aid. And it was like, oh, well, these people are living in $1 million homes. And yet $1 million home in New York wasn't very fancy. So, I guess there's perspective there. So does it ever make sense and can you just have your kids be on their own so they're not affected by parental income, and then maybe we help them anyway? Or does it ever make sense? Kind of like when you're filing, like, I'm not going to file married, I'm going to file separately. You have to talk to your tax advisor. Does that work in college ever, where you just say, kids, you got to be on your own?
It's possible. There are some steps you have to go through. I'm not an expert in that area.
Okay.
It is possible, but usually you are viewed as, if your parents are providing support to you, then they would be the ones filing, or you would be filing the FAFSA with their income information.
Gotcha. And talk about the calculators, because just like you're going to go buy a house, you should probably know what the mortgage payment is going to be before you sign the paperwork. And you're saying this process for student financing is the same. We can look and estimate what we're going to have to pay before we even know if we're going to accept the offer of the getting into college.
Yeah, absolutely. So the federal financial or the federal loan rates are set once a year. That comes out, I think, in late May or early summer. And that's the rate for the remainder of the year. So if you are taking out a federal student loan this year, you can easily find what that rate is. And you can also easily find the maximum rates available. That's available on government websites and a lot of private websites too. So that's easy to look up. So you can really have a pretty good idea if you're just taking out private student loans of what those payments would look like in the future. Not private students, if you're only taking out federal student loans. If you are adding private student loans, those can vary based on your credit worthiness, if the student is applying by themselves, if they have a co-signer and things like that. But there are, many of these private student lenders out there, and you can find information. They keep that updated on what their current rates are. It's usually a pretty big range because you may have to apply to actually find out what your rate would be.
Just like a mortgage rate, your credit worthiness is going to matter. If you have a co-signer, it's going to matter. And that interest rate is a big factor. I mean, I was looking up on your site. There's things from 3, 4, 5% up to double digits, 13, 14% on a student loan. That could be a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're really talking, and that's where people start to get into trouble when it comes to paying it off, because that's really adding quite a lot. And when you hear stories of people who've been paying for a long time, maybe their income is less than what they had hoped or expected, or maybe they just hadn't really thought about it and taken out whatever loans they felt they needed to go to that program, that school that they really wanted to go to without thinking about what that was going to mean on the back end. But when you're paying those really high rates, and that's going to add a lot to your monthly payments, or you're going to be extending it out over more time in order to make it more affordable for yourself.
Yeah, okay. Do you generally start paying the loans after you're done with school? You don't have to pay them when you're in school, or do you?
You don't have to pay them when you're in school, but most loans will start accruing interest when you're in school. So when you graduate, your payment is already going to include some of that accumulated interest for the time that you haven't been paying. And if you go back to grad school, typically you'll take a break from paying as well, but that interest will keep accumulating. Okay,
that was my next question. In today's world, a lot of people are going beyond a college education and going to get a law degree or a medical degree or a master's. So those can be really expensive. So do you have to factor that in perhaps early on when you're deciding where you want to go to undergrad?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the biggest loan packages in total that you see are from people who go on to medical school or law school. They're the ones who are graduating with, well over $100,000 in debt, maybe over $200,000 in debt. But they also will typically have a pretty good sense of what they can make once they finally get all the way through that educational funnel. And they have a sense of, how long it would take them to pay that back. So it's not that it's not a burden, even for a doctor or a lawyer, but they have more certainty there over what kind of salaries they can be making, for sure. It's more the people who are either not graduating from school. That's where you get a real problem. If you've been taking out loans and you end up not getting even your undergrad degree. Then you're going to get into more problems. Or if you get a master's degree, but you're still not getting yourself into a field that is necessarily going to really increase your salary substantially. So, those are all things to consider. And it's really all about being an informed consumer. All of this is just about having the information so you make the best decisions for yourself today and in the future, and not being too heavily swayed by just what you really want to do or what your dream place, location, school is, and trying to bring some practicality into that as well.
Okay, so back to the 529 plans. If you happen to be listening to this and your kids have a while to go before college, every little bit helps. Basically, time is money. The interest is going to compound, and you could put a tiny bit away, and it's just going to keep multiplying. So the best thing is you should start as early as you possibly can.
Yes, Absolutely. And as I said, maybe you start with $50 or $100 a month today. Maybe in a few years you increase that, and maybe by the time they're in college, you're putting several $100s a month, really depending on your situation. Or as I mentioned, maybe you have some windfalls along the way. You get a big bonus. You can take a portion of that, put it into the kids' 529 plans. But just to give you an idea, if you put for 18 years, if you put $250 a month into a 529 plan at a 7% return, you could earn about $108,000 at the end of that. So if that's, the average return you're getting over time, and almost about half of that will be earnings. And again, going back to the tax benefit, that's where that tax benefit is so valuable. So if you have, let's say, $50,000 or more in earnings, if you had that in a regular mutual fund, for example, as you're going to withdraw that, you're probably paying 15% of capital gains tax on that. Instead, that could be thousands of dollars, right? So instead, all of that money is going to your child's education.
Tax-free when you take it out for education.
Tax-free, exactly. So you're not sending $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of that to the IRS. You're sending that to the college to pay for tuition and other expenses.
Right, and the same thing if you're deciding to take money out of your 401k, and obviously if you're young, that's a whole nother problem because you've got that 10% penalty. I know that a lot of people have waited to have kids longer, so there may be someone who can fund it and they're of age, they're of that 59 and a half and they can take it out, but they're gonna have to pay income tax on it if it's not a Roth.
Yeah, well, so that's right. So with the Roth, and some people will say, well, why not just use a Roth IRA for education?
Why not do that?
Yeah, because then I can save for retirement, and if I need some, I can take it out of there. And you're right, you don't get hit with the tax. And so Roth has a special education provision where you can take that money out to pay for education expenses. Problem is, when it comes to the FAFSA, that money is going to show up as income in the next year. So, and that's going to, so if you pay for money from your Roth this year, in next year's FAFSA, for example, that's going to count against you.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So
as opposed to, let me just say, as opposed to the 529 plan, those assets that are parental assets, and whether the 529 plan is in the child's name or the parent's name, it's considered a parental asset. Only 5.64% of that is considered on the FAFSA. So, it's a small portion of it versus 100% of the income.
Gotcha. I'm going to take a quick break to let our sponsor say something, and we'll be back with more questions about, especially if you haven't done any of this yet, what your advice is to start doing right now. So we'll be back in one moment.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
Welcome back to Kara's Cures. We're talking about managing the financial stress, the financial stress of college, and we have Mert to be here from all about managing college financial stress. So I just, for those of us who've been, maybe you're like, oh, I started funding my 401k, I did all this, I bought a house, I did, but they didn't do the 529, and now they've got kids applying to college. I have a 529, I'll confess I do, but it doesn't have nearly enough in it. We've been good about funding retirement first, or you buy a house, or expenses come up, and so yes, we have some 529s, but they're not going to cover everything. So what do you do if you're already your kids are in high school, or like my daughter's applying to colleges right now?
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people are in that situation. Maybe they get started later or never get around to putting exactly what they'd hoped to put in. So that happens. A lot of people are there. So I think that's where being an informed and educated consumer can really help you. So it's not just about how much do you have set aside to fund college, but what's your cost of college going to be? And so you have both sides of the equation. There are a lot of different strategies that people employ. So it's important to be aware of things like when you're looking at colleges. Well, first of all, there are different types of colleges. Obviously, community college, and then there's in-state public colleges, out-of-state public colleges, private universities and colleges. Typically, private colleges have the highest sticker price, and we can talk about sticker and net price in a second. But if you're going to be sending your kid out of state, the out-of-state public college may appear cheaper, but it's definitely worth looking at private schools if there are some that you're interested in, because they may have more generous aid packages. And especially some of the lesser known private schools may have pretty good merit aid. So it's really important to shop around when you're looking, at schools and see what's out there and what you can get.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about that, because one of the things, if you are going to see a financial advisor, we talk about this on Great Day Connecticut, a lot of people will see with you, not even charge you, but help you set something up. And they'll say when they're filling that up, do you want to fund a private education out of state? Do you want to fund an in-state education? Because how much you're going to save is different. So I think as parents, we naturally want to go, well, if my kid gets into their dream school, I have to send them. And what you're saying is we actually have to learn how to live within our means with education costs. Just like you might love that big house on the beach, but if you can't afford it, it might not be worth the investment. So how do we start with that? How do we compare and shop around when it comes to college?
Right. So there are so many resources out there, that rate colleges, that have lists of colleges. So I do think it's about, first of all, determining what type. Going on the campus visits can be really helpful to help your kids understand what they really click with. So there may be a particular brand name school that they've heard of that they'd like to go to, but maybe there are other schools that offer a similar ambiance or environment that they could get some of the same benefits out of. So whether it's, like a college that has a smaller campus where there's maybe a higher ratio of students to teachers. So it's really figuring out what is it that is going to be successful and valuable for your child, and then trying to look around and find schools that fit those categories. And there are definitely plenty of lists and information out there on different types of schools. So I think it's narrowing it down, though, to, are you looking for an urban type environment and what that can bring as far as, the atmosphere that you have around and the access you have to different types of things, or are you looking for a different type of environment? So really understanding that, I think, is important too. And as well as, what are you hoping to study? And where are schools that may have excellent programs? There are so many colleges and universities out there that most of us may not have really heard of, but that doesn't make them bad schools. It's just a matter of really educating yourself on what's out there for what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of kids, it's a trend in the Northeast. They want to go south. You might be looking and saying, well, it's out of state, but the southern schools are sometimes less than the northern schools are, even if they're in state. So maybe it's comparable. Then you have to factor in plane tickets or whatever. But in our last, less than 5 minutes together, you mentioned sticker price versus negotiation. Should we be treating this like a business deal and negotiating with these colleges? And how do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, what is published on a college's website is called its sticker price.
Okay.
And very, very few families actually pay that sticker price because there's going to be some type of aid package. Even just on federal financial aid, 87% of students receive some form of federal financial aid. So it's pretty high. So know that difference. Know that I believe all of the schools have to have a net price calculator, but if not, there are ones that are offered by organizations like the College Board. So you can look that up for a net price calculator and put in different colleges that you're interested in. That'll just give you an idea on average of what the average student receives versus what's published. That'll at least give you something to get started with, because then you can see where there are colleges that are maybe more generous in terms of like what they offer as their aid packages. But then another thing I would suggest is talk to people. If there is college that you're really interested in, there's so many forums online today. It's easy to go on Reddit or any other forum and start looking around for people, maybe parents who are going through the same decisions or are already sending kids to those schools. Understand how it's worked for them. You might be able to pick up some good tips there, see what maybe unexpected costs they have had, but also what they've been able to get as far as aid packages. That'll start giving you some ideas and information from actual experiences.
Okay, so when do you typically know what you're going to have to pay for college? Does it come with the acceptance or after you fill out the FAFSA? Or how are you going to know even what the, when you go shop for a house, it has a listed price. But how do you know what you're getting? And when are you going to find out that so you can start your shopping?
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily come with the acceptance, but so the idea with the FAFSA is normally you fill it out as early as possible.
Okay.
Because of the FAFSA simplification last couple of years, I'm sure you've heard about all the fiasco that there's been around the rollout of that, unfortunately. So there have been delays. This year, again, the FAFSA rollout normally comes out October 1st. It's going to be delayed this year. They're doing a soft launch, and I think there are a small number of people who will be able to start filling out the FAFSA in the fall. But it should be available for everyone in December. And hopefully they'll have ironed out a lot of the problems that were plaguing the website before.
Yes.
The good news is it is a much simpler form. It pulls information directly from your tax forms, so it should take less time to fill out. People who stuck with it last year and were able to get in and do it said it was an easier process. So anyway, so you'll fill out the FAFSA. That goes out to the schools that you're interested in, and with that, they put together your aid package as well, and you'll get a separate aid package basically from your school.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. I know you're going to tell folks, if I said, well, do one thing. I think you've really given us lots to think about, but you have so many resources on savingforcollege.com, and that might be the one place to start. Is you can learn a lot more about, it even does a comparison, like which 529 is better for you, and even just thinking about this more like an educated consumer rather than, my kid got into wherever, of course I'm going to send them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have calculators in Saving for College too that you can use to start to estimate your likely future costs. So if your kid is still 4 years off or 10 years off or 18 years off, you can start to get an idea of what college is likely to cost for the type of school you're interested in. And with that, you can set goals and go from there.
Martha, thank you so much. So much information. We're out of time for this episode. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.
Thank you.
CareSQ is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.